The guest's hand closed around Piper's wrist before she could pull the tray back. He wasn't subtle about it. Grant Sefton, Table 9, third Scotch, Brunello di Montalcino, cufflinks, smiled the way men smiled when they had never been told no by anyone who mattered. "I'm not finished talking to you," he said. Piper Dunleavy had been lead server at the Vault for 6 years. She had poured drinks for cabinet ministers and NHL players and a retired Supreme Court justice who always over-tipped and smelled faintly of cedar. She had managed 1,000 difficult evenings without incident. She was very, very good at making herself invisible when the room required it. But Grant Sefton's grip tightened, and something clicked into place somewhere in her muscle memory. She didn't panic. She didn't yell. She rotated her wrist toward the gap between his thumb and forefinger. The weakest point of any grip, her aunt had explained 17 years ago on a foam mat in a Sudbury garage, shifted her weight onto her back foot and redirected the momentum she'd been given. Grant Sefton went off the bar stool. Not elegantly. The stool caught his hip on the way down. A $400 bottle of Oban 21, the one she had just uncorked for the guests at Table 12, hit the marble bar top and shattered. The sound was tremendous. The scotch spread across the floor in a slow amber catastrophe. The vault went completely silent. Every person in that room, every Bay Street lawyer, every developer, every out-of-town executive spending the company's money on a Thursday, turned to look at the plus-size bartender standing over a man in a bespoke suit, holding nothing but an empty tray. Phones appeared. They always appeared. From a private booth separated from the main floor by frosted glass, one man watched without moving. Cassian Dre hadn't touched his drink in 3 minutes. He didn't reach for it now. He simply watched the woman on the other side of the glass. The way she stepped back, the way she set the tray down with both hands, the way she didn't look at the man on the floor at all, only at the scotch spreading across the marble. He leaned back slightly in his seat. Interesting. Grant Sefton found his voice before he found his feet. She assaulted me. He was already upright, already pointing. His suit was intact, but his pride had landed much harder than his body. I want security. I want the police. Do you have any idea? You were holding my wrist. Piper's voice was quieter than she expected it to sound. I asked you to let go. I was trying to get your attention. You had it. Several guests near the bar exchanged glances. An older woman in a green blazer set down her wineglass very deliberately. A man in his 40s, the kind who'd seen enough boardrooms to recognize when someone was reframing the facts, frowned at Grant with open skepticism. 2 hotel security officers pushed through the side door. One asked everyone to remain calm. Grant demanded everything. Piper stood in the middle of it and rubbed the inside of her wrist, where the redness was already beginning to show. Her manager, Pamela Good, arrived from the back office with the expression of a woman who had already started calculating liability before she'd seen what happened. She wore the same shade of lipstick every day because she believed in consistency as a personal philosophy. Miss Dunleavy. The name came out like a memo. I'm sorry about the Oban, Piper said immediately. Pamela stared at her. I beg your pardon? The 21-year Oban. It's gone. I'm sorry. I know it was just opened. A young server named May, standing near the service station, pressed her hand over her mouth. Piper, May whispered. You just threw a man off a bar stool. I know. A very expensive man. He was holding my wrist, May. Still. May looked at the amber puddle on the marble. Do you think that comes out of your tips? Piper looked at the ruined scotch. That's exactly what I'm worried about. May blinked. Then she laughed, a single helpless burst of sound she quickly swallowed. The kitchen supervisor, who had come to the pass to see what the noise was, ducked back through the door. A moment later, there was laughter from behind it, too. For the first time since the incident, the pressure in the room eased. On the other side of the frosted glass, Cassian Dre reached for his drink. His assistant, Yannick, who had been standing a careful 3 feet back for the better part of an hour, leaned forward. Leaving? No. Cassian set the glass down again. I want every camera angle from this floor, tonight. Yannick didn't blink. He'd worked for Cassian long enough to know that the calmest instructions carried the greatest consequence. He stepped out to speak with hotel security before anyone had the chance to delete anything. The police arrived and behaved professionally. They took statements from Piper, from Grant, from 6 guests willing to give their names. They reviewed what footage the hotel could provide on short notice. They were thorough and ultimately non-committal, which told Piper exactly nothing about how the night would end. Grant Sefton left through the lobby with the energy of a man already rehearsing his press conference. Pamela Good found Piper in the staff corridor 20 minutes later. Her lipstick was impeccable. Her voice was not unkind, exactly, but it was measured in a way that meant she'd already spoken to someone above her. Pending review, Pamela said, I'm placing you on temporary suspension. Piper looked at the wall behind her manager's shoulder. How temporary? Until we assess whether your response was proportionate under company policy. He wouldn't release my wrist. I understand that's your position. It's what the cameras will show. Pamela folded her hands. The cameras will show what they show. In the meantime, the hotel cannot be seen to take a position before the review is complete. Piper nodded slowly. It was the kind of answer that was technically reasonable and felt deeply wrong, which was its own particular skill. Should I return my uniform? That won't be necessary. What about the ficus in the staff lounge? I water it every Monday and Thursday. Pamela's composure fractured slightly. Not enough to matter, but enough that Piper noticed. The ficus will be fine, Miss Dunleavy. It drops leaves if it goes more than a week without water. We'll manage. It's a peace lily, actually, not a ficus, easy to confuse. Pamela closed her eyes for a moment. You're free to go. May walked her to the staff exit, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the autumn chill blowing off Lake Ontario. The loading bay smelled like diesel and leftover kitchen herbs. You shouldn't apologize, May said finally, for any of it. I know. So why do you keep doing it? Piper looked at her wrist. The redness had deepened into something that would bruise by morning. Old habit, she said. I spent a long time trying not to take up too much space. May looked at her steadily. You took up exactly the right amount tonight. The clip online ran 11 seconds. It didn't show Grant grabbing Piper's wrist. It began at the moment of impact. The sharp movement, the stool skidding, the bottle shattering, the sound of the room going still. Without the seconds before it, the whole thing looked like nothing so much as an unprovoked attack on a paying customer in a luxury hotel bar. By Friday morning, it had been viewed 2 million times. Grant Sefton appeared outside his attorney's office at 10. He wore the same suit, freshly pressed, and spoke into cameras with the confidence of someone who had done media training and hadn't updated it in a decade. What occurred at the vault was completely unacceptable, he said. I was assaulted without provocation. We will be pursuing every available remedy. A reporter asked whether he had made physical contact with the employee first. Grant said he had no further comment and walked into his building. Across the city, in the 43rd floor of a building that didn't advertise whose name was on the lease, Cassian Dre watched the press conference on mute. He didn't need sound to recognize dishonesty. He had spent 20 years studying people under pressure. He knew what it looked like when someone was performing rather than explaining. Yannick brought a tablet. The hotel's security footage, all of it, from 4 angles, time-stamped and unedited, had been preserved and encrypted. His legal team has already contacted the hotel, Yannick said. Cassian looked once more at the frozen image of Grant addressing reporters. The loudest story, he said quietly, is almost never the true one. He reached for a folder on the corner of his desk. Acquisition documents. They had been sitting there for 3 days. Move up the timeline on the hotel purchase. Have it finalized by Monday. Yannick looked at him. Because of the footage? Cassian didn't answer immediately. He was looking at something in the footage, not the incident itself, but the moment after it. A woman in a service uniform setting down an empty tray, looking at the floor, clearly more distressed about a broken bottle than about the man who had just been holding her against her will. Because of the woman in it, he said. Piper didn't sleep well. She sat in her apartment with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she'd stopped drinking an hour ago and thought about her Aunt Vera. Vera had been with the RCMP for 22 years, Sudbury, Timmins, then Ottawa. Before a knee injury retired her to a small house in the Laurentians with a German shepherd named Regulation and an opinion on everything. She was the kind of woman who wore her hair in a practical braid and referred to emotions as useful data. When Piper was 12, Vera had started teaching her things. Not fighting, Vera was specific about that. "I'm not teaching you to fight," she'd said, the first evening, with the overhead light flickering in the garage and a foam mat on the concrete. "Fighting is for people who've already lost the initiative. I'm teaching you to leave." 12-year-old Piper had been skeptical and demonstrated this by standing with her arms crossed. "I'm not in danger. I hope you never are. Then why are we doing this?" Vera had given her a look that Piper only understood now, from the other side of adulthood, as patience. Because hope isn't a plan. For the next year they practiced in that garage every few weeks. Not punches, not kicks, wrist releases, balance disruption, how to move toward the gap in a grip rather than against it. Piper had complained the entire time that it was boring. "Good," Vera had said. "If self-defense is exciting, something has already gone badly wrong." What she remembered most wasn't the mechanics. It was what Vera said before they stopped for the evening, every single time, without variation. The goal isn't to win, it's to clock out and go home. Sitting in her apartment now, tracing the bruise on her wrist with her thumb, Piper understood exactly what she had done on Thursday night. Not an attack, not retaliation, just enough space to step back. Vera's lesson, 17 years later, delivered in 11 seconds of footage that the internet had watched without context. Her father had supported every one of those sessions, had driven her to Vera's house, waited in the truck, never once made her feel like learning to protect herself was anything other than ordinary and important. He'd been gone 4 years now, heart attack, fast and unfair. She whispered at the ceiling. "Didn't start it, Dad." The ceiling didn't answer, but the tea was cold, and she decided that counted for something. The review meeting was on Tuesday, in the hotel's 3rd-floor boardroom, corporate representatives on one side, management on the other. 2 lawyers observing. Piper near the end of the table, hands folded, told she was there to answer questions if asked. Grant Sefton sat across from her, looking entirely at ease. The investigator dimmed the lights and played the footage. The first angle was wide, the full bar from overhead, Piper moving through the room with the economy of someone who had done this 10,000 times. Grant at table 9, watching. A comment that made her smile fade, her turning to leave. The second angle was tighter, his hand on her wrist, her pause, her turning back and saying something, his laugh. The third angle was crystal clear. His grip, her attempt to continue walking, blocked. The words a retained lip reader had confirmed, "Please let go." Grant's smile, his grip tightening. Then the release, the movement, the stool, the bottle. Piper stepping back immediately, not advancing, not pursuing, setting down the tray and looking at the scotch on the floor. The investigator paused the footage. There was no further physical contact after the point of release. Every camera confirms the same sequence. The employee attempted to leave on 2 separate occasions before responding. The response was proportionate to the threat presented. Grant Sefton said nothing. His lawyer started a sentence. One of the corporate lawyers said quietly, "Your client is on camera, on 4 cameras." The sentence did not finish. The room was very still. Then the boardroom door opened. The man who walked in didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He was somewhere in his early 40s, with a kind of stillness that read as controlled rather than calm. Dark suit, no tie, a watch that didn't advertise its price, the sort of man who didn't need a room to go quiet because it already had. One of the corporate representatives stood up without appearing to decide to. "Mr. Dre." The regional director's voice was careful. "We weren't expecting." "You don't need to be." Cassian Dre handed a folder to the nearest person at the table without looking at them. "The acquisition was finalized this morning. My legal team will follow up on specifics this afternoon." He looked around the room once. "One thing I'll say now." Everyone waited. "Under my ownership, no employee of this property, or any property in the Dre portfolio, will be penalized for defending themselves from physical harm." He said it the way someone stated something obvious, as though it was embarrassing it needed to be said at all. For a moment, nobody moved. Then May, who had somehow ended up in the room and Piper genuinely had no idea how, started clapping, hard. 2 servers joined, then 3, then kitchen staff in the doorway. Then one of the corporate lawyers glanced sideways at a colleague and started applauding too, and after that the sound simply built until it filled the room. Grant Sefton picked up his jacket and left without speaking. His lawyer followed, carrying a legal pad with nothing written on it. At the far end of the table, Piper sat completely still. She was not accustomed to being defended. She was even less accustomed to someone altering a company-wide policy because of what had happened to her. The bruise on her wrist had faded to yellow. Something in her chest that had been braced for 6 days, finally, carefully, let go. She looked up. Cassian Dre was looking at her from across the room. Not with pity, not with performance, with the expression of someone who had spent years studying people under pressure and had just seen something worth studying. She gave a single small nod. He returned it. The vault reopened 2 days later. May had saved Piper a blueberry scone from the morning delivery. The kitchen supervisor had written her name on the staff whiteboard, with a small star beside it. The peace lily in the staff lounge had lost exactly 2 leaves. "I kept a close eye on it," May said. "Thank you." Justice Fenn called the front desk. May had the expression of someone delivering genuinely extraordinary news. "He left a message," he said, and I quote, "Tell her that was textbook Kuzushi. I'm impressed." Piper stared at her. "I don't know what that means." "He seemed to think you did." That afternoon, a message arrived through the hotel's internal system. Courteous, direct, signed by someone in Cassian Dre's office, requesting that Piper come upstairs to the 14th floor at her convenience. May immediately fixed Piper's ponytail without being asked. "I can do my own hair," Piper said. "I know, I'm doing it anyway." The 14th floor office overlooked the hotel's courtyard, and, beyond it, a stretch of Lake Ontario caught in late autumn light. Cassian was standing at the window when she knocked. He turned. "Please sit." She sat. Then, "Because the silence seemed to have room in it for honesty," she said, "I should mention I'm not entirely sure how to behave in a meeting with the person who just bought the building I work in. The same way you'd behave in any other meeting. I tend to apologize when I'm nervous." "I've noticed." He sat across from her. "You apologized about the scotch before anything else." It was very good scotch. The corner of his mouth moved in a way she was beginning to learn meant something. "I reviewed every witness statement," he said, "and all 4 camera angles. You used exactly the force required to create distance. Nothing more. My aunt would have been disappointed if I had." "She trained you?" "RCMP, 22 years. Piper looked at her hands briefly. "She always said fighting was what you did when you'd already lost the initiative. She wanted me to be able to get home. That was the entire lesson. Just clock out and go home." Cassian was quiet for a moment. "My hospitality group has 47 properties. Restaurants, hotel bars, private event spaces. We have security policies." He pushed a folder across the desk. "They're focused on protecting property." She looked up. "I want to change that," he said. "I'd like you involved in redesigning the employee safety framework across the full portfolio." "I'm a bartender." "You're also the person who exposed a gap no audit ever found." "I don't know anything about corporate policy." "You know what it feels like to need protection and not have it." She opened the folder. Training frameworks, anonymous incident reporting, manager accountability measures, practical response protocols. It was thorough and thoughtful and missing something obvious. She closed the folder. "I have one condition." He leaned back slightly, and she had the distinct sense he had been waiting for this. "Go ahead. Every employee gets practical, hands-on self-defense training. Not a video module, not a brochure. Actual instruction with qualified instructors." She kept her voice level. "Servers, bartenders, housekeeping, kitchen crews, bell staff. Everyone." She paused. "Not learning to fight, learning to leave. There's a difference, and the difference matters." The office was quiet. "My aunt has a phrase," Piper said, feeling slightly exposed now. "The goal isn't to win. It's to clock out and go home." Cassian extended his hand across the desk. "Done." She blinked. That was fast. "I'd already made the decision before you came upstairs." "Then why make me state the condition out loud?" "I wanted to hear how you'd frame it." She looked at his hand, then at him. "You knew what I was going to say." "I had a reasonable suspicion." A pause. "You were worried about the scotch before you worried about yourself. That told me something." She shook his hand. Then, despite the past week, despite the exhaustion and the bruise, and the 6 days of not knowing how it would end, she laughed, properly, without apology. "I cannot believe people keep bringing that up. I hope they never stop." The months that followed moved in the rhythm that hospitality always moved in. Inventory counts and late service, and the particular momentum of a city that ran on other people's celebrations. New safety protocols went up near every staff entrance at the Toronto property. Managers completed mandatory conflict training. Incident reporting became standard, and every new hire, regardless of their role, attended a 4-hour practical workshop in a cleared ballroom, led by a retired RCMP officer named Vera Dunleavy, who drove down from the Laurentians in a truck with a German shepherd in the passenger seat. Vera ran the sessions without ceremony. She corrected grips, demonstrated balance disruption, and told the same story about a diner in Timmins in 1998 that Piper had heard 40 times and still found relevant. "I like her," Cassian said, watching through the ballroom window after the first session. "She'll receive that as a professional assessment," Piper said. "She doesn't do compliments." "Neither do I, usually." Piper glanced at him. He was watching the room with his focused expression, the one she was learning to distinguish from his neutral expression, which looked identical to everyone except her. She was getting better at reading him. She wasn't sure if that was professional development or something else entirely. She was starting to think it was something else. The program spread beyond Toronto the following spring. A hotel bar in Vancouver, a restaurant group in Montreal, an event venue in Calgary. Piper traveled to each site and sat in circles with the people who worked the shifts that went unnoticed. The late-night kitchen crews, the early morning housekeeping teams, the front-of-house staff who smiled through everything. She always started the same way. "I'm not here because I'm brave," she'd say. "I'm here because one night I was absolutely terrified, and someone had already taught me what to do." People listened, not because she claimed to be fearless, because she never did. Cassian attended more sessions than his schedule technically required. He said it was operational oversight. Yannick, who had worked for him for 11 years and had never once heard him use that phrase about a training session, said nothing and kept meticulous attendance records. One evening in November, after closing a Vancouver staff conference, Cassian offered Piper a ride back to her hotel. Rain on Pacific Coast dark, softer somehow than Ontario rain. The city lights blurred against the wet windshield. "Were you scared?" he asked, not clarifying which night. He didn't need to. "Terrified," she said. "I knocked a full tray of glassware off the bar afterward from shaking and told May I did it on purpose." "She didn't believe you." "She was very kind about not saying so." Piper watched the rain. "My aunt always said fear isn't the problem, letting it make your decisions is." She turned slightly. "I was scared. I just didn't let it choose for me." Those words settled in the car and stayed there. A year after Grant Sefton went off the barstool at the Vault, the Dre Hospitality Group held a staff recognition evening in the Toronto Hotel's main ballroom. Everyone came, bartenders and line cooks and housekeeping supervisors and the event coordinator from the Calgary venue, who had driven 18 hours because she said it seemed important. Vera stood in the corner drinking one glass of wine and explaining elbow positioning to anyone who stood near her for more than 30 seconds. Piper was talking with a young server from the Montreal property, 23, recently hired, clearly trying to look like she wasn't nervous, when she felt rather than heard Cassian cross the room toward her. The young server saw him first and went very still, the way most people went still around Cassian Dre. Piper had stopped going still around him months ago. She couldn't remember exactly when. He waited for the conversation to reach a natural pause. The server excused herself at a pace that was nearly running. "You have that effect on people," Piper said. "Less often than I used to." She looked at him. He was looking back in the way he had been looking at her for several months. The way she had been carefully not examining for the same amount of time. "There's something I've been meaning to say," he said. The ballroom noise continued around them, warm, loud, politely uninterested in their corner of it. "What I recognized in you that night wasn't courage," Cassian said. "I've seen courage in people I'd never trust with anything important. What I saw was restraint. You protected yourself using exactly what was necessary. You didn't chase. You didn't escalate. You stepped back and worried about a bottle of scotch." He paused in the way he paused when he was choosing words with precision. "Restraint after the danger passes is the rarest quality I know." Piper said nothing for a moment. "I spent most of my life being very good at not taking up space," she said finally. "I thought that was modesty. My aunt kept telling me it was just a habit I'd learned wrong." She was right. She usually is. It's profoundly annoying. He looked at her with an expression that, on anyone else, might have been called warm. On Cassian Dre, it was simply honest. "I admired you before I understood why, and then I understood why." He paused, and then it became something else. The ballroom noise faded slightly at the edges the way sound did when something more important was happening nearby. Piper reached out and took his hand. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone who had been patient for a long time and had stopped minding the wait. Across the room, Vera glanced over, assessed the situation in approximately half a second, and went back to explaining wrist mechanics to an enthusiastic line cook. Yannick was studying the ceiling with professional dedication. May was not even pretending to look at anything else. Piper thought about a garage in Sudbury, and a foam mat on concrete, and a woman in a practical braid saying, "The goal isn't to win." She thought about her father, who had driven her to every one of those sessions, and waited in the truck, and never once made her feel like learning to protect herself was anything other than ordinary and important. She thought about all the people who had sat in circles in ballrooms across 4 provinces over the past year, servers and dishwashers and bartenders, and the woman from housekeeping in Vancouver who had cried during the session and said it was because nobody had ever told her she was allowed to leave. All of them walking out with one more thing than they'd arrived with. Not a weapon, not bravado, just the simple practiced knowledge that their dignity was worth protecting. That silence wasn't the same as safety, that they were allowed to go home. True strength, Vera had said once, isn't about how hard you can hit. It's knowing exactly how little force you need and having the clarity to stop the moment you're safe. Piper Dunleavy had spent most of her life making herself small. She stood in the middle of a full room with Cassian Dre's hand in hers, and she took up exactly as much space as she had always deserved.